So welcome back to session 2 on the care and protection of older persons. And now what we will do is look specifically at the legal and policy framework, because it's important to understand it as the context of what the protection of older persons mean, but more importantly also to contextualize the whole issue around the fact that abuse of older persons is a crime in South Africa. So what I will do, I'll start off by just talking about the legal and policy framework, and then I will zoom into two very important pieces of legislation. Thereafter, I will talk about the roles and the responsibilities of the main role players, government, the different departments, and then the NPO sector, and then the leaders, the pastors, of our churches, our assemblies. So it will be important for us just to go through this, and I will be reading some of this because obviously there are clauses or articles that it's important for you to hear and then to go to this piece of legislation. What we will also do is make this a link available to the different forms and different kinds of policies, legislation, even conventions and treaties that we have signed as South Africa around older persons. So the first piece of legislation, and the most important one that I will come back to, is our Constitution. As some of us might not know, this is the main and the most important piece of legislation in South Africa, because a lot of the other acts are based on the rights, the whole issue around the importance of the dignity and the rights, protecting that of every person, older persons included. So that's the first one, Constitution. The second one that I think is being amended and looked at presently is the Older Persons Act, or there might already be a new act, but presently what I have is the Act number 13 of 2006. Then we have the Aged Persons Amendment Act, so that's what I was referring to, some amendments that have taken place in 1998. Then there are two international documents, and I was fortunate to have been part of the second one in Madrid some years ago, the United Nations Resolution 46 of 1991, and then the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. Now, every country should have a plan of action to deal with the protection and care of older persons. The responsibility in government is seated in a number of departments, but the main department that is the guardian of the Older Persons Act is the Department of Social Development, and I will talk about their role in a little while. And then we have the Domestic Violence Act, because we're talking about the abuse of adults here. And there's so much abuse that happens in the community, in families, and it's important that we then use the Domestic Violence Act to deal with that. Sometimes it's the spouse. Sometimes the spouse is much younger. And it's not just males abusing females or men abusing women. There are many cases where there's a younger woman that really abuses verbal, emotional, all kinds of abuse. So one has to look at it holistically and from that point of view. So those are important pieces of legislation. The others is also the frail care guidelines for older persons. There are some standards, some norms and standards that are important here, where we have to look at that when we provide care and support in the communities through those community projects, as well as in our institutions. We have to use those guidelines, use those norms, those standards that apply to older persons. Then from a health point of view, we have the Mental Health Act, because a lot of our older persons have mental challenges as well. Then there's the Criminal Procedures Act, because we have to use that and see if this is a crime, what will happen and what the processes are. And then there's a Criminal Procedures Second Amendment Act. And then obviously the most important one for people receiving grants is the Social Assistance Act, where pensions and grants, mostly pensions nowadays, in the past it was referred to as grants as well, but I know there are some foster care grants and those kinds of things, but for older persons it is a pension. So let's be aware, and I always say to people, don't try and read every clause what you have to do is go to the front and look at the first part of the Act. What is the definition? That gives you the purpose. It gives you the context of what the whole Act is all about. And secondly, you then go to the content page, and then you look at what is there. And then as and when you need it, you then go into those sections that talk about the protection, whatever you want to hear. That's the way to look at any piece of legislation. So let's start with the Constitution, because the Constitution is a very important document, as it protects the rights of all, especially the vulnerable, and this includes older persons. Chapter 2 of the Constitution contains 27 rights, collectively called the Bill of Rights. So there we can see what the rights are of the different people. Don't confuse it with the for example, the specific Convention on the Rights of Children from the UN as well. But because we've signed or ratified that as a country, that is built into the Constitution as well. And this is where we can find that. Section 9 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa provides that no person may unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against a person on several grounds, including race, gender, religion, social origin, and age. So that's spelled out. So when we have discrimination, that's where we measure it against. That's where the courts measure it against as well. And then Section 10 of the Constitution provides that everyone has the right to have their dignity respected and protected. We refer to that in the first part of our presentation as well. So go to your Constitution, read up on these ones. You will have copies of this document. We will make sure that it is available for you to use. And when you do that, before you present, look at that. Obviously, you can use this video, and the video will be available to use wherever you need that. But if you want to take this further, because this is also a training of trainers, we would like you as the Welfare Committee, the leadership of the church, to also take it into the community as well. So please, it will be available. Before you present, this is a presentation from my point of view. I have a full understanding of it. You might need to read up and look at it, and please use it as a basis. So the second piece of legislation is the Older Persons Act. That this one establishes the framework aimed at the empowerment, beautiful word, and protection of older persons. So if it talks about empowerment, what are we doing to empower our older persons? Do we make them independent on us so that we do everything for them? Or do we encourage them to live as long as possible independently? AFM Welfare has two types of facilities for older persons. On the one hand, we have the frail care facilities for those frail old persons that can't look after themselves anymore. And then we have facilities for independent living. Sometimes they need assisted living, so there's a combination between assisted living and the whole issue around independent living. But for those people that can look after themselves, there are facilities that they can either hire or buy as a part of a sectional title process, and they then live together, they protect one another in the same kind of community in those facilities that we have. There are numerous examples of that throughout South Africa as well. So the Older Persons Act gives effect to the Bill of Rights. So now it takes those rights and it makes it part and parcel of the rights of the older persons. So it aims to maintain and promote the status, the well-being, the safety and security of older persons, their dignity, their right to dignity to be respected, and so on as well. It further explicitly criminalizes all forms of abuse of older persons, and you will see that I am focusing on that because you don't know that you are committing a crime because you are maybe somebody in your church, somebody in your community, your neighbor. When they abuse older persons, they can be reported, and the police, there will obviously be a charge laid against them. The abuse, ill treatment, violence, and neglect of an elderly person strips the older person of their dignity. So please, when you treat them with gold. I always say to men, they must treat their wives as a flower, and they will have fragrance for the rest of their life. Make the lives of our older person as comfortable as possible, but as independent as possible for as long as they can look after themselves. So the legislation also defines and talks about the following two things around what is older persons abuse. First of all, older persons abuse is an intentional act or failure to act that causes or creates a risk of harm to the older adult. We spoke about that in the first part of this workshop. Then the definition is an older person that I said earlier is someone of age 60 years or older. The abuse occurs at the hands of a caregiver or a person that the older person trusts. And sometimes they are so worried and scared that they can't talk to anybody about it, but their bruises, their injuries speak for themselves. So let's then now move towards the end of this workshop by talking about how the care and protection of older persons are managed. What are the roles and the responsibilities of the key role players? And let me talk about the three most important ones. I'm going to group all of the government departments in one where the biggest responsibility lies, where the regulation of the different pieces of legislation and policies lie to ensure that older persons are protected and not abused. But we're not living in a perfect world, so they have to also deal with the abuse of older persons. Then there are a whole range of NPOs that are working with older persons. There might be one in your community. Please go and find out what they do so that you can use them in the church environment as well for referrals, for care, for support, and so on. Also your old age homes, your residential facilities for older persons, the frail care centers, as well as the centers for independent living. So a lot of them are run by NPOs, and some of them are also run by the body corporates because it's independent living. It doesn't fall under the same piece of legislation that we're talking about here. Mostly issues around frail care and some of the assisted living are taken care of in the NPO Act. But what is important there in the Older Persons Act, Older Persons Act also takes care of the protection of older persons wherever they are, in the communities, in independent living, as well as in our own old age homes and facilities for the care of frail care people. The last one that I want to talk about is in our own church. The responsibilities of the pastor, the leadership, the sisters or the ladies, even the ministry, the important role that the young people can play to go out and know who the people are in the community. The older persons that lives around the church, so that they can visit them and ask them what they can do to support them. So it's important for churches and even the children. A lot of those older persons live on their own. The children are all grown up. The grandchildren live overseas. They need to talk to children. They need to know that they are still playing a role in the lives of children. So even the children's ministry can play a role in the care and the support of older persons. So let's unpack that very quickly. Let's start with the government departments. And I repeat once again, the abuse of older persons is a crime. The responsibility to protect our older persons lies with them, but lies more with us as well as their children and as the broader family, community members, people working in the old age homes, as the name is, but like I said, the new name is the residential care facilities of older persons. So what are the key departments that are working with older persons? Number one, the Department of Social Development. That's where SASSA comes in as well. An important role in terms of the pensions and other grants as well. So the Department of Social Development is responsible for the prevention, for investigating, as well as reporting. So you see, the investigation goes over to SAPS as soon as a social worker or somebody from the community reports it to social development. They report it in turn to SAPS, and there's an investigation that takes place, and I'll come back to investigations under them as well. And then reporting to the various structures, or receiving reports from the institutions, from families where abuse is alleged so that they can find out if it is abuse or whatever it is. Then the second most important department is obviously the Department of the South African Police Service, and the investigations part of this is there. They've got to make sure that there's a follow-up, and that's sometimes where things fall flat because they don't go out and do that. So we have to hold them accountable as well. And that's where an important structure like the Human Rights Commission comes in. You report to there as well so that somebody makes other people and other departments responsible as well. So the Department of Justice is another important department, obviously for persecutions. Once again, the investigation is done by the police and then it goes over to the court case. The Department of Health, a very important preventative role and also sustaining role with their hospitals, with their clinics, with their district hospitals, working in the community, hand in glove with the old age homes, hand in glove with older persons and clubs and whatever in the community that take care so that they can fulfill their role of providing excellent health care. Then obviously the Human Rights Commission, ensuring that the human rights are prioritized and respected and the dignity of the person is also protected and prioritized. So let me tell you just a quick thing what you can do in terms of how to report cases. So when I talk to the pastors now, when I talk to the leaders, when I talk to the different members of the assembly now, you need to know what you must do. You are not the social workers. You are not the police. You've got to report these cases to the social workers. You've got to report these cases to the police. So let's go talk about that as well. So you've got to report any case of abuse to the Department of Social Development. They've got to investigate. If they don't, you have to take it up with their seniors, with the minister even. So if cases are not investigated, if there's an injury or any form of abuse, you take that abuse and you report the person to the police. That will investigate, a case will be opened and so on as well. For any financial irregularities or unauthorized deductions, please contact the South African Social Services Agency, also referred to as SASSA, and the toll-free number is 0800-601011. Don't write it down. It will be handed to you so that you can use this in the work that you do with older persons. There's also an email address that I will leave with you. And then any human rights violations. And sometimes there's a link between the physical abuse, sexual abuse, the criminal part of that, and then the human rights violations. So you report it to both areas. The human rights violations are reported to the South African Human Rights Commission, and I will also leave an email address. You'll see it on the slide. Please write it down and report those kinds of cases as well. So those are the most important areas of where things are reported. Hospitals, clinics, when they see there's abuse, they too should report it or do report it to the police or to the Department of Social Development for investigation. So let's get to the role of the NPOs. That's the second category I spoke about. The first one was the category of the government departments and its structures like the Human Rights Commission, and then now I'm talking about the NPOs. So the first one that I suggest that when you need advice, you need somebody to come talk to you, do a workshop with you around older persons, you can talk to them, is Action on Older Persons Abuse. And I'm leaving the telephone number, you'll see it on the board, 021-426-45255, and all of the email addresses are there as well. And then there's an important one that deals specifically with abuse, and that's called HALT. HALT is the acronym, and it stands for HALT, Older Persons Abuse. It's actually HEAL is the word, nice word, HEAL, because we need to move towards healing them. HEAL. So HALT, Older Persons Abuse line. It's a toll-free line. I will repeat that number just for the sake of that. 0800003081. And then the last point I want to make about NPOs and their role is that it should be noted that the majority of the old age homes, facilities for older persons, are run by NPOs. So the NPOs are doing a marvelous job in the care and support, but then they have to make sure that they are monitored as the committees, the boards that are responsible for them, to go in, they say, the best fertilizers under the shoes of the farmer, meaning that the farmer was in the land. So you've got to, as a committee member, as a board member, you can't just go to meetings. You've got to be physically, don't interfere with the work, but do your oversight responsibility by just walking around and seeing what's happening there as well. So it's important for us to use this in terms of the important role that NPOs play in the care and support. We're also fortunate that we have our own 3 facilities, frail care, 1 in Sarepta, 1 in Kuils River, and 1 in Touws River. Please visit those facilities and support them financially. They are struggling financially. We need your support. But more important, we need your prayers as well. Let's move now to the role of the pastors and the other church leaders. And I've mentioned all of the departments in the church, but I want to say specifically, I want to talk about every member, because every member is part of a family. Every member have grandparents. They might have died, but you know the role. So there are other people that are older in your community as well. Please make it a point to care for your older persons. Have a specific program to deal with that. It's good. I've ministered recently at the Islamic Assembly, where they had a beautiful service that were led by the older persons. They call them the seniors in that facility, in that particular assembly. It's good to have that as well. But there are other programs that I've just mentioned that we should be involved with. And those people that are leading those processes around older persons groups and so on, tours for older persons, well done with that. But it is also important because you are in touch with one another, visit one another to see and identify if there are issues around abuse. So we all have a role. So whilst I'm talking about pastors and leaders, this applies to every member of the assembly to make sure that we deal with it. Now, we have given you some ideas around what you should do and how you should do it by inviting older persons to this weekend, but don't just wait for this weekend for that to happen. There should be a regular interaction with the older persons in the community. So number 1, pastors and church leaders can play an important role in preventing abuse because they are often the first stop for help. The older persons trust and loves their pastors, leaders. So in some churches, I spoke to Pastor Danny Grobler the other day, and he is now in another assembly as an elder, as an older person himself, running an assembly, but he was responsible for the ministry. And I'm hoping that more churches will have ministries around older persons, caring for them, visiting them as well. And sometimes if you don't have a pastor, one of the elders can assume that responsibility as well. So you are the leaders and you are the first stop for help. Number 2, in many cases the pastor or leader of the older adult ministries may be the only person that will save the victim's life. So remember, you stand between life and death in that particular situation, or protection and the harm of older persons. Leaders should become knowledgeable about about older persons' abuse, knowing the warning signs, and I've just given you a list of those. And please go to Uncle Google. They will give you many, many more on the internet. If you just press how to deal with older persons' abuse, a whole range will come up for you. Read, get yourself. This is a very good start, very good basis, but there are other material that you can get as well. So by knowing the warning signs, you will help with the healing process of the older person, or you could save a life, like I said earlier. The abuse is a crime. I spoke about it 100 times. And responsible leaders working with older persons, they are in your church. They are their elders. You are responsible for them as well. You must, with a capital M, UST, report cases of older abuse to your authorities. The Department of Social Development and SAPS. Those are the 2 areas where you have to report. You could do it with SASA, you could do it with when it comes to the integrity of older persons and their rights are being not attended to. You report that to the South African Human Rights Commission as well. So what we should recognize as pastors and as assembly leaders and as other leaders, that abuse happens in our own churches. It happens to men and to women. and they've experienced before, and they need counseling and support. They are experiencing it now, and you have to intervene. And it's important that a lot of older persons have also perpetrated abuse in their lives. They need to deal with it. They need to ask forgiveness, and they need to amend their relationships. The next point is that you should reach out and work with external agencies, including local older person support centers, the police, the old age facilities, and recognizing that you alone can't do it. You are just one of the important role players, but link up with all of the different role players, because a lot of the abuse requires a multi-sectoral approach. It's important that pastors and church leaders must give a consistent message that the abuse of older persons is wrong and contrary to our Christian teachings, biblical principles. Next point is we have to provide confidential. I mean, it's so important for us, not only for social workers and for other people that deals with these issues confidentially. Every pastor, every member must see this as confidential. And pastors, there's nothing wrong with you. Whenever you have leaders and other groups of people working with other people, let them sign a confidentiality clause where people's information will be kept with them and in the church leadership environment. So you have to be non-judgmental. You have to listen with an ear that are not judging them. They need to feel safe when they're in your presence. So if they disclose, they need to know that their information you will cover and you will be part of their protection as well. Next point is to educate yourself and other church leaders about all of the aspects that we've mentioned, the abuse of related to the abuse of older persons. And then lastly, increase awareness and have discussion points on a regular basis on the abuse of older persons in the church, regular teachings, even sermons, because the Bible is full of that as well. You'll find sermons on older persons and how they should be protected as well. Have workshops, invite speakers from outside to come in and equip or refresh the information and the knowledge and the skills that people need. And then you've got to recognize the skills, the signs. Any signs of mistreatment, physical, verbal, personal health, living conditions, medical needs, exploitation, because if somebody is taking advantage of their finances and their property, be part of that process. Last point, ek is 'n tipiese pastoor amper, nee ek sê pastorie, but typically I have another last point, and the last point is contact the proper authorities. In South Africa, it's easy for you to make a call to the nearest DSD. It's well known where they are. If you don't have the numbers, we'll also put those numbers up so that you can call them, but it is available. And then if it's abuse and it's physical, report it to SAPS. If the person is in immediate danger, call 911. That brings us to a situation where we can now relax and then start asking questions about the different areas that has been presented. Thank you. I hope that I've challenged you. I hope that you've listened intensely to this presentation today, and that you will want to know more, you want to learn more, and that you become a champion in the protection of our older persons. God bless you.